Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister tried to interfere in a shipbuilding contract, and when he got caught, he tried to destroy the reputation and career of the person who stood up to him. We've seen this before, and it's a dangerous pattern with this government. Why is it that anyone who says no to this Prime Minister ends up with a target on their back?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the prosecution in question was handled by the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, which operates independently from the Department of Justice and independently from my office. My office had no role whatsoever in the decision to seek a stay of proceedings. The decision belongs to the Director of Public Prosecutions alone. And the Director of Public Prosecutions has stated in February and repeated today that there was no contact or influence from outside the PPSC on either the initial decision to prosecute or the decision to stay the charge.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
But the lawyer for Mark Norman was quite clear that this government did impede this investigation by withholding important documents and facts. When it looked like the truth was going to try to come out in the SNC-Lavalin corruption scandal, the Prime Minister shut down the investigations. And when it looked like the truth in this scandal was going to come out, the Prime Minister tried to prevent a fair trial by withholding evidence and using delay tactics. So what is in those documents that this Prime Minister is so afraid of?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, as I've stated a number of times in this House, the government has met all of its obligations with respect to third-party records applications during the course of the trial. All documents from priority individuals identified by the defence in February had already been provided to the court. Mr. Speaker, as I've said, it's the Public Prosecution Service of Canada that has undertaken the evaluation of the evidence of this case and the prosecution of this trial, and it's their decision, Mr. Speaker, and their decision alone to stay the proceedings.
Mr. Speaker, Vice Admiral Mark Norman had the honour and integrity to face allegations against him himself. Exactly. The Prime Minister doesn't have the same fortitude or backbone. Let's look at what Mark Norman's lawyer did say. She said, quote, "There are times when you agree with what happens in a court and at times you don't, and that's fine. But what you don't do is you don't put your finger and try to weigh in on the scales of justice. That is not what should be happening." That's exactly what this government did in trying to block and obstruct evidence coming before that court. What is in those documents that this Prime Minister is so afraid of?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Monsieur le Président, comme j'ai dit à maintes reprises, mon bureau n'a joué aucun rôle que ce soit dans la décision de suspendre ce dossier. Cette décision relève à la direction du service des poursuites pénales. La directrice elle-même des services poursuites pénales a déjà indiqué en février dernier, elle l'a répété aujourd'hui, que je n'ai donné aucune instruction, ni directive, ni même eu de contact avec qui que ce soit, ni mon bureau, dans la décision de poursuivre ou de suspendre les accusations.
Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Well, that runs contrary to what we've heard from Mark Norman's defense team. They've raised serious concerns about Scott Bryson, about the Liberals' cozy relation with the Irving's companies, and about political interference directly from the Prime Minister's office. Mr. Speaker, sunshine is the best disinfectant. Canadians deserve the truth. So why is the Prime Minister refusing to hold an independent investigation into the Liberals' handling of this case?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the Director of Public Prosecution stated today, as she stated in February, that there was no contact or influence, including political influence, from outside the PPSC at either the step of the initial decision to prosecute or the decision to stay the charge. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we believe in our judicial institutions. We believe in our prosecutorial institutions, unlike the previous government, which had a record of interfering with the courts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This was said today in the press. I have an important story to tell that Canadians will want and need to hear. We have had documents withheld, we've had witnesses silenced, and we have seen a personal attack on the reputation of a revered public servant. And I'm not talking about SNC-Lavalin. What I am talking about is the trial of Admiral Mark Norman. Will the Prime Minister do the right thing and apologize to Captain?
The Honourable... Order. The Honourable Minister of National Defence. Order.
Mr. Speaker, as the Public Prosecutor Service of Canada confirmed today, every decision was made completely independently. And let me quote from that statement. No other factors were considered in this decision, nor was there any contact or influence from outside the PPSC, including political influence, in either the initial decision to prosecute Mr. Norman or in the decision to stay the charge today. Any accusations otherwise, Mr. Speaker, are absurd.
Honourable Member for Milton.
What is absurd is the fact that these cabinet ministers are being sent out with such flimsy lines that actually do not address the matter. The matter is simply put this. Admiral Mark Norman had to spend the last 2.5 years scraping and fighting and defending himself while this government sat back and let it happen. They didn't produce the documents they were supposed to. And in fact, the Prime Minister on 2 occasions said that this matter would end up in court even before the RCMP laid the charge. What are they afraid of?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, based on the decision today, the charge against Vice Admiral Norman has been stayed. Based on today's decision, my Deputy Minister has reviewed the policy in place regarding Vice Admiral Norman's request to have his legal fees paid for as relates to this case. I agree with this, Mr. Speaker, and have authorized it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Député.
The government's witch hunt against Vice Admiral Norman has collapsed, but has exposed the ruthlessness of a Prime Minister who was willing to destroy the career of a naval officer who served this nation with distinction. Why? Because he raised questions about a lucrative pork barrel deal on an important naval deal. So what we've seen is the shocking lengths this Prime Minister will go to interfere in the legal system to help cronies of the Liberal Party, but to attempt to destroy an admiral's career is way over the line. I'm asking the Prime Minister to stand in this House today to apologize to Vice Admiral Norman and his family.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member well knows, the RCMP, which did the initial investigation, operates independently of government. The Public Prosecution Service, which looks at the evidence gathered by the RCMP and decides whether to lay charges, which proceeds with the prosecution if it decides to proceed, and then in this case decides to stay the proceedings, also operates independently of government, independently of my office, independently of the Prime Minister's office. And the Director of the Public Prosecution Service stated that today, as she stated in February, that there was no outside...
The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Oh, he left out one important point. It was a star Liberal MP, a former decorated general, who stepped forward and was willing to testify against this Prime Minister and his own government over this harassment of Admiral Norman. So this is much bigger than defending the cronyism of the Liberal Party of Canada, which the Attorney General has been defending as of late. This is about the rule of law in Canada. So why is the Prime Minister refusing to stand up, to apologize to Canadians, to explain himself, and to launch an independent investigation into the behavior of his government?
The Honourable Minister of Justice. Order.
Mr. Speaker, the only thing I agree with the honourable member's statement is that this is about the rule of law in Canada. And indeed, the rule of law in Canada, Mr. Speaker, functioned very well. From the RCMP beginning with its investigation, through the Public Prosecution Service acting independently and making decisions based on the evidence as it came through. Mr. Speaker, this Public Prosecution Service operates independently of government. It operated independently of government. It made appropriate decisions. Mr. Speaker, it proves that the rule of law is alive and well in Canada. The system works well.
It is unbelievable that this Prime Minister can't bring himself to apologize for what he's done to Vice Admiral Norman, a man who has served our country with honour for decades. The Prime Minister seems to have no problem apologizing for the actions of others, but when it comes to his own bad conduct, sorry seems to be the hardest word. Why did this Prime Minister have no problem apologizing to a convicted terrorist, Omar Khadr, but can't bring himself to apologize to Vice Admiral Norman for the damage he's done to his career, his family, and his reputation?
Scheer. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I obviously reject the premise of the honourable member's question. This country is all about the rule of law, Mr. Speaker. This country is about great institutions like the RCMP, like the Public Prosecution Service, which was a good thing, Mr. Speaker, started by the previous Conservative government in order to give independence to the prosecutorial decisions and the governance of prosecution proceedings in Canada. Mr. Speaker, that system worked well today. Don't just believe me, you can believe the lawyer for Admiral Norman, who said the rule of law worked.
Honorable.